Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the vice presidential debate that was held on October 1, 2024? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of the debate, move to a summary, then offer my analysis. On October 1, 2024, the vice presidential debate was held in the borough of Manhattan in New York City. Donald Trump's running mate, Republican Senator J.D. Vance from Ohio, was up against Democratic Governor Tim Walz from Minnesota, who is running alongside Kamala Harris. CBS hosted the 90-minute debate. The moderators were Norah O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan. CBS said they would not fact-check the candidates during the debate, rather it would happen online. The microphones were left on during the debate, although CBS reserved the right to deactivate them. Now moving to a summary of the debate. The debate opened with a question about turmoil in the Middle East. Tim Walz immediately started attacking Donald Trump, saying that he was dangerous and should stop talking about crowd sizes. He indicated that Kamala Harris has demonstrated steady leadership. J.D. Vance talked a little bit about his background and how Donald Trump promotes a peace through strength policy. When asked about Hurricane Helene and how it was connected to climate change, J.D. talked about how the hurricane was a tragedy and Donald Trump stands for clean air. Tim said that Donald Trump called climate change a hoax. On the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border and the issue of mass deportation, J.D. blamed Kamala Harris, expressed concern about all the illegal drugs coming into the United States, and said he would start working on the problem by deporting the criminal migrants. He said that he spent more time at the southern border than Kamala, and that Springfield, Ohio, was being overwhelmed by immigrants. Tim Walz blamed Donald Trump for the problem and said that Kamala used to prosecute transnational gangs. Margaret Brennan mentioned how Springfield, Ohio, has a large number of Haitian migrants who have temporary legal status. When J.D. pointed out how the moderators were not supposed to fact-check and then went on to explain the immigration process, Margaret cut him off, and the candidate microphones were deactivated. The next question was about the economy, including the national deficit. Tim argued that he supports tax cuts for the middle class. J.D. explained how Kamala Harris has driven up costs and made middle-class life unaffordable. He defended Donald Trump's economic plan by criticizing the PhDs who disagree with it, arguing they don't have common sense. Tim responded by saying it's important to trust experts, and Donald does not have all the answers. At this point, the debate shifted to the candidates' qualifications. Tim indicated that he was a knucklehead. He said that he misspoke about his claim of witnessing the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, then repeated that same false claim. Tim said that he was in China during the democracy protests. The massacre occurred on June 4, 1989. Tim did not arrive there until August. For some reason, Tim simply refused to admit that he had been deceptive. J.D. tried to explain why, in 2016, he called Donald unfit for the nation's highest office. He explained that he was wrong about Donald Trump because he was manipulated by dishonest media stories. On the issue of abortion, Tim said that women should be in charge of their health care. J.D. said that voters in each state should decide the issue for themselves. The next question was about the concept of holding the parents of a school shooter criminally responsible. J.D. Vance said that he trusted law enforcement. Tim Walz said that he was a gun owner and a hunter. He thinks the U.S. can learn from Finland, a country with a high rate of gun ownership but a low number of mass shootings. J.D. responded by talking about how the U.S. has a mental health crisis. When asked about banning assault weapons, Tim said that he had become friends with school shooters. I think he meant friends with the family members of school shooting victims. The debate shifted to a discussion about inflation and the high cost of housing. Tim said that the government should help. J.D. said that illegal immigrants are driving up home prices. On the topic of health care, J.D. said that Americans with pre-existing conditions should be covered. Tim said that he would defend the Affordable Care Act. As far as child care, both candidates supported paid family medical leave so parents could care for newborns. The question about Donald Trump contesting the results of the 2020 election was a dramatic point in the debate. J.D. explained Donald's behavior by saying there were some problems in 2020. He then talked about how Kamala Harris supports censorship. Tim explained how Donald's behavior was unacceptable. When an election is over, people should shake hands and support each other. J.D. explained that false claims about elections are not just a Republican issue. Democrats do it too, like when Hillary Clinton falsely claimed that the election was stolen by the Russians. During the closing statements, Tim talked about how he was optimistic. J.D. talked about how Kamala Harris has made life difficult for Americans. Polls conducted after the debate indicated that most people believed J.D. Vance was the winner. Several well-known columnists also sided with J.D. Vance, including those from the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. Despite the apparent victory for J.D. Vance, the polls indicated that the debate made very little difference as far as which candidate people would vote for. Now moving to my analysis. Let's take a look at the strengths and weaknesses for each candidate in this debate. I will start with the strengths of J.D. Vance. It was clear from the mannerisms of both men that J.D. was much more comfortable being in a debate. He was articulate, spoke clearly and confidently, and appeared to be following a predetermined strategy, like he was well prepared. Even the more challenging questions did not throw J.D. off guard. J.D. was able to focus many of his responses on the shortcomings of Kamala Harris. He did not attack Tim Walz directly. Rather, he seemed quite cordial toward his opponent. No effort was made by J.D. to vilify people who disagree with him. He conveyed a sense that he was reasonable and open to changing his mind as issues and his understanding of issues evolved. On a few occasions, J.D. used Tim's words to make his own points. He was able to think on his feet, process information quickly, and turn that information into arguments. When Margaret Brennan violated the rules of the debate and attempted to fact-check J.D., he immediately pounced and scored points. This victory did not come at the expense of Tim. Rather, it folded into the larger narrative that the mainstream media is always against Republicans. J.D.'s tactic was so effective, the moderators made a second mistake by silencing the microphones. This made them seem immature, desperate, petty, biased, and frightened. Moving to the strengths of Tim Walz, Tim conveyed a sense that he was relatable, friendly, and a fan of bipartisanship. He could oppose Republicans without being their enemy. He emphasized how he grew up in the middle class and wanted to help that group financially. On issues where he disagreed with Republicans, Tim was careful not to alienate them. For example, he talked about how he supports the Second Amendment, but just wants some restrictions. Like J.D., Tim was cordial and did not attack his opponent directly. He emphasized the importance of accepting the results of the election and how it is critical to shake hands and be supportive after a winner is declared. This exposed one of the greatest weaknesses of Donald Trump. Namely, Donald will not let go of the stolen election myth. Moving to the weaknesses of J.D. Vance, there were times when J.D. failed to provide direct answers, although for the most part he did try to provide some type of response which was relevant to the question. At one point, Tim asked J.D. directly, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? J.D. stayed with his argument that both he and Donald had problems with the election, but J.D. did not really answer the question. This was the most obvious instance of sidestepping an issue in the entire debate. Clearly, J.D. is trying to avoid breaking from Donald on this topic because Donald militantly promotes the stolen election myth. However, J.D. could have offered a better crafted response. He could have said something like, yes, I believe Donald Trump lost the election, but not everybody sees it that way, and I respect differences of opinion. This would have been a better setup for mentioning Hillary Clinton's false claims about the Russians stealing the election, JD could have pointed out how there were ridiculous claims on both sides of the aisle, but it's a good idea to hear people out. Instead, JD made his comment about Hillary without the proper setup, which made it obvious that he was deflecting attention away from Donald Trump. JD made a terrible attempt to defend Donald on the issue of ignoring experts. By claiming that PhDs do not have common sense, JD adopted an anti-science stance. This position is unsustainable and supports the accusations of his opponents. Moving to the weaknesses of Tim Walz, Tim did not always speak clearly. He stumbled over his words and made a few mistakes, like confusing Israel and Iran and saying that he became friends with school shooters. He looked nervous and often gazed downward when he was talking. One of the biggest problems was Tim not owning his deceptive behavior about Tiananmen Square. He made a reference to his own incompetence, but then doubled down on his false claim. This was a great opportunity simply to admit that he lied, but Tim would not own his behavior. This failure was not caused by pressure from J.D. Vance. Tim Walz did this to himself. Unfortunately, Tim appears to have a poor relationship with the truth. Although not mentioned in this debate, Tim lied when he said that he was not intoxicated during his 1996 drunk driving arrest, and he lied when he said that he was deployed to a war zone when he was a member of the National Guard. When considering the vice presidential debate in its entirety, who do I believe was victorious? I believe J.D. Vance won by a small margin. Both vice presidential candidates made a number of good points and effectively attacked the opposing presidential candidate. However, J.D. was better prepared and more confident. This debate was very different than the presidential debates. J.D. and Tim participated in a productive and civil debate without name-calling. They both pretty much used the same tactic, arguing their opponent was good-natured, well-intentioned, and reasonable, but they disagreed with them on policy issues, and they strongly disliked their opponent's running mate. In my opinion, these men appear to be more reasonable than the presidential candidates who they support. Here we see two civil and friendly individuals trying to attack and defend deeply flawed running mates. It makes me wonder if the country would be better off if J.D. and Tim were the presidential candidates instead of the vice presidential candidates. If nothing else, it would make the debates less dramatic and easier to watch. Now moving to my final thoughts. It is unfortunate that the most productive debate during this election cycle will have the least impact on the election. I think the lesson learned in this case is that the United States can do better than the two candidates who are running for president. There are other people out there who are capable of having intelligent and meaningful political debates without losing control of their emotions and dodging questions. Those are my thoughts on the vice presidential debate. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They consistently generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.